This being the Manitou Lake meeting, July 8th session. With us this evening is Jim Sipes. He's our consultant that's been working with us on this process so far, so he's graced us with his presence once again. If we do have questions that we can refer to him throughout it, but we do have a couple of hard copies. If anybody wants or needs them, I can pass them out. After the last meeting, we had some good discussions. I think we were about a month and a half ago talking about this process and going through the comments that we had received on the previous, we called that the 80% draft. And going through those comments, we then, I think, had some good discussions with this group, trying to come up with a consensus for the group of where we were in our discussions, where we were, wanted to go with this manual. We took those comments here and tried to provide those summaries back to Jim and his group and have them revise the document, and what they came back up with is this document here. We've since incorporated on the front cover. A little while back we asked this group and also the 250 group for images we'd like to see on the cover of what you kind of think of as mixed use, and then also incorporating elements into the document here as well. So kind of looking to take tonight's meeting, is a discussion of those changes. Have we looked at those? Are we comfortable with the changes that are there? Do we still have outstanding issues, concerns that we want to talk about? Do we have questions for Jim that are out there? As staff, we want to talk to this group some about the process. Once an applicant comes in, is that a town board track? Is it a planning board track? So we'd like to discuss that with this group as well. So before I get into start highlighting some of the changes that have been made, I don't know if anybody has any initial questions, comments that they want to share, but kind of just looking to make sure that we're still heading in the right direction. Everybody's still kind of agreeing with the process and the path that we're on, and hopefully we can continue to move forward to wrapping up this project. Okay. Some of the comments we got into last time, and I won't get into the deep detail of it, but we passed back to them off of this the 80% draft set back in June. Went through the comments, and we kind of came through what was the consensus of the group, what we liked, what we didn't like. Some of the items we talked about was the height of the buildings. I think we're still the majority of the group was still okay with 6 stories for Manitou Lake, as we had kind of talked in the past. We also talked about the bubble areas and refined the areas for what was in that Zone D. That seemed to be one of the areas we kind of had concerned about, was what that build-out was in Zone D and whether there was buildings could go in that or not. So I think we tried to streamline that a little bit, or define that a little bit further to limit what can be done in that area. Not that it's unusable, but that it's not for development. More of a preservation area in those regions. Thoughts, concerns? Okay. So we talked about some of the boundary zones. We revised those maps. So let's get into 250. Let me get my Manitou Lake piece. We modified the ceiling heights. I think what we heard loud and clear from this group and the 250 group was, although we want to define what it is, we want to make this as flexible as possible for our developers so that it can be done. They can have some, imagination, come up with something cool that, we may have not seen or we have, not experienced before, but, allowing some definition to, how this is developed and how this is brought together. So I know we were limiting or eliminating some of the written percentages on how much commercial you had to have, or how much maximum floor area. Hopefully that opens it up a little bit, but it's still gives some definition or defined how that can be built out. I'm trying to think on Manitou Lake, what other major items we changed. Jim, you have any?
No, I just want to jump back. You were not here at our last meeting, Jim, but I remember early on you were kind of supportive of having a higher ceiling on the first floor of the buildings where there was a mixed-use component. And I think we, in terms of trying to get more flexibility in design, for a potential developer, we kind of faded away from that higher ceiling. Any concern for that, or are you comfortable with us doing that?
Yeah, not really. We had a lot of discussion about the height of what you could wind up building down there. And I think when we looked at it, we thought partly about setting an arbitrary height, that what was going to happen is that parking and the geology of what's there now would be the major restrictors for what that building height would be. It's hard for us to see it going up much more than, say, just based on those conditions, beyond a 6 or 7 story structure. That winds up, even with shared parking, that's a lot of parking. And really about the only way to make it work there is with a parking garage. And a parking garage becomes more expensive, and there's some costs associated with that. So I think as we've talked about, Jim, bottom line, this is a document that I think we want you all to feel comfortable with. And we have a tendency to be fairly lenient, knowing that these other restrictions are going to come into place, and that'll be what really determines what that cap is. But I think we're fine with 6 stories, and that's what we want to do.
Was that your question?
No, the question really related to, you were setting a height limitation on a higher first floor elevation, like 14
okay,
feet or something
right.
of that nature.
Yeah, the idea behind that is that you do a higher first floor for commercial. And we've talked about, and I think your comments were, well, what if commercial is not available? We know of projects where they kept it at 14 feet and still allowed residential in there and made a transition. And I think what we've got in the document now is we lowered that height to, I think it's 12 feet, so it's a little higher than normal, than what you typically find in residential, but it's lower than what you would find in a lot of first-story commercial. So it's a
Do you think that's adequate for being able to put HVAC and sprinklers in a restaurant?
But it is. I mean, you look at most restaurants have a lot of clear space above head. And part of it is you can do the HVAC in a lot of different ways so that height is really not an issue. So when we provide the storage, it's less for something utilitarian. We provide 14 feet. It has less to do with something utilitarian like HVAC as it does with really defining kind of the scale of the space. When people come into a retail commercial area, they want it to feel bigger, and the heights.
I had the concern that 12 feet wasn't enough.
I think the discussion, or at least the original requirement, was that it had to be a minimum of 14 feet. So I think we're saying the minimum is 12 feet, just to give it a base that it can be universally done. It can be taller if they want to make a 15-foot first floor. I don't think we're not prohibiting that. We were setting the minimum that it had to be minimum of 14 feet high. There were some concerns about, how is that a usable space for multiple different commercial office space. That's very tall. So I think we kind of brought that down, saying it had to be a minimum of 12, so at least it's flexible if it changes over, but not requiring that as the maximum that you could go.
And one of the big things is when it comes to the town for review, the town will review specific uses that are planned. And if it's for something that needs greater HVAC or something like that, where those floors need to be taller, that's part of the discussion they'll have at that point. We've talked a lot about how do you start to define, well, one of the things we said is really after you work with a major developer on the first project, you kind of need to revisit this and say, well, what worked and what didn't work? What questions came up that we didn't expect? Where do we need to be more flexible? Where do we need to be more lenient? But I think the height, discussion of height will occur when they submit a plan talking about their intent.
And some of the other stuff we were talking about last time was, we talked about permitted uses. Some of the ones that are specifically not permitted, we added last time, was dry cleaners in schools to this area. I think that was what the group had talked about. And then under especially permitted uses, we added for piers, boat launches, other things that obviously are subject to state and local regulations. So those were 2 items that were both added and deleted from this document as well.
When we talk about schools, we're talking about educational institutions such as public schools or private schools. We're not talking about a dance school or
No, I think we're,
School of diving.
yeah.
a school of diving or an art school.
And maybe we
or
need to
something like
define that, but we're just thinking, you know, a Penfield school to go in there, it would
Right.
use up all the space and just the massive amount of parking that would be needed for a use that's, you know, a sole use that would kind of eat up a lot of the parking area, create a big impervious surface that, you know, is not a multi-use. Any other permitted, non-permitted uses, concerns that this group still has moving forward? One of the things that we did add into the overall permitted or not permitted uses, and Jim and I and Zach were talking earlier today, did talk about amusement parks. And one of the things I think we need to define is, you know, come up with what is an amusement park. I mean, are we thinking Seabreeze, or does that exclude, you know, other recreational type activities? I know we've had one developer that's been interested in doing, and I think we talked about this last time, about doing some, you know, tow ropes or something that, you know, could pull you around, that you could do some wakeboarding, or you could have some other scuba diving, or you could have some other recreational uses. I think we just need to make sure we define that, you know, I think as amusement parks, we don't want Darien Lake in there or something else that's going to have roller coasters, but what one person's version of an amusement park is versus somebody else's, I don't know if we want to make sure we don't exclude, you know, uses of scuba diving or other something else, if, you know, what we're thinking about, so.
Even kayaking or canoeing could be construed as an amusement park. It doesn't necessarily mean that. I think we have to define recreation versus amusement park.
Yeah, and that's one thing we've just kind of been talking about today is, you know, is making sure we kind of define that so we don't exclude uses that we may want. We did add to the document that, you know, there can only be electric motorized boats or whatever on the water, but mostly they intend to be kayaks, canoes, sailboats if you can get enough. I know they've sailed down there, enough wind down there. Jack, I know you guys have had some sailing events down there, so that's worked before.
And one of the things that I did really see a lot about, and I know that was one of the Conservation League's concerns, was anything at least that talks about buffer and visual barrier type thing in terms of, you know, what's to keep some, I mean, I know obviously the town would be able to keep some, clearing out a whole bunch of trees that in theory are causing a buffer right now, but I don't really see anything listed like that. In terms of, you know, you take that roadway down in, that could dramatically look different if that got cleared out and all of a sudden that opens up a whole new space that no one realized was visible from a different area or from the road or anything like that. There's no real, you know, there's setbacks, there's things like that, but that's purely buildings, but nothing talks about the actual green space that's there right now. In terms of, you know, what would keep someone from taking that all away besides, you know, when it goes to town board, they say no.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we can talk about. You know, obviously there may be areas that, you know, they would need to clear of the site in order to, you know, incorporate development, but, you know, the periphery and stuff like that, we could incorporate, you know, elements talking about keeping the periphery trees.
Or if you talked about like the zone D might be, you know, called wherever, you know, more forever wild, you know, not quite like that, but something that, you know, limited that impact, because I know with your neighbors across the top there, you know, if half those trees came down, whatever, accidentally or however you want to say it happens, but people will then notice all of a sudden, and then it's too late.
Yep.
So it's, you know, if those kind of things aren't addressed, that's not fair to somebody coming in, looking at the project saying, oh, we could open this right up for nice walkways and things like that. Someone might picture a boardwalk, and then that means nothing between, you know, the property and the creek or whatever it happens to be, where everyone else might be visualizing it something different.
No, I think that's a good point. I think this group is all visualizing fitting a pathway, or however wide it is, whatever material it is, along that outer loop between the pond and the creek, and kind of fit it into the existing area. But I think this group is visualizing keeping the trees and keeping everything else. So, you know, maybe we can incorporate some language to make sure that that's, you know, that's more retained than somebody else that visualizes it being an open, sunny area that's paved from side to side. And I mean, yes, we will have either planning board or town board, you know, review of that process, but at least to kind of show what the intent is and to kind of define that a little further.
I think one of the things that we've done on a lot of projects is we require a vegetation assessment as part of a plan submittal. And that identifies, where major trees are, the type and the quality of the trees. It's tough to say keep, for example, 90% of all the trees when right now we don't know the quality of what's there. Part of it is you want to identify the quality material, you want to protect that. And if other vegetation is removed, then you want it replaced with quality material that will grow in and help keep that buffer. So, and I'm not sure, Mark, whether what we've written right now, we don't specifically require that. I mean, part of it has to do with the process, the review process of what the town will do. So perhaps it goes in there.
Yeah, maybe we can just beef up, as Rochelle was just pointing out in page 86 in Zone D, under the natural environmental use is first of all the name of the zone, and it says the design objective is to keep these areas in the natural condition and to provide public access via multi-use trails. So it kind of has a use in there, but maybe we can put a little bit more definition of that. Existing trees shall remain of such size as preservation or conservation as possible. Obviously, even when we do have conservation easement, we never exclude people from cutting down dead trees or things that are harmful or everything else. We don't want to prevent that no tree can ever come down. Obviously, all trees have their life cycle as well, but yes, Bill.
Mark, not only that, you mentioned the quality of trees, but just having the trees there serves to stabilize that bank, and that's very important. I mean, if you walk along that bank now, you can see how the existing trees, whether they be cottonwood or whether they be oaks, are holding that bank together. And when that creek rages down through there, it cuts back into those trees. There's some of them that have fallen in there already, but they're important to holding the banks together and keeping that creek where it is.
No, that's a very good point, Bill. Great. Anybody else have any comments, concerns? One thing we did want to talk to this group about, and I think we briefly broached it last time, was we need to talk, and we've been talking internally about the process going forward. Once this document hopefully is adopted by the town board, let me back up. Let's talk about the process of kind of how we go from where we are today to where we are, and then we can talk about application process. So hoping this evening, going through this and reviewing this, everybody's kind of in a general consensus that we're moving in the right direction. This document is getting closer to what would be considered a more final doc. Hopefully after tonight, if everybody's generally okay with it and we're heading in the right direction, staff needs to spend some time going through the nitty-gritty pieces of it, the grammar, the sentence structure, how it's set up and everything else. But hopefully as we move forward, we can feed that stuff back to Jim and his crew, have them refine it, get more towards a final document. Then from there we would present that to the town board, as the recommendation from this committee. Here's what we like, here's what we'd like to see rezoned. Internally as staff, we're going to be working on a map to show which parcels are in or out. So we'll have to, right now it's kind of been a bubble. So we'll need to pull that map together. We've kind of showed them all along. Bring that back to this group as well, as we're going to have to say we recommend this piece to be in, this piece to be out. The bubble area now needs to come down to a defined limit of what actually may be rezoned. So once we kind of go through that, then make the recommendation to the town board is here's the document we like, here's the area we'd like to see. The town board will take that. Hopefully they'll decide that, they like it and they'd like to go to a public hearing on it. We can then have the public hearing. They like to do it once the summer session's over, once you get back to the school time. Most people are back into their normal routines, would be home, available to come to a public hearing, have the public hearing, and then move towards adoption sometime, later in the fall or towards the end of the year. One of the big items that I think is outstanding that we still need to talk about is what's the process once somebody comes to make application? Which board does this group want to see or would like to see take control or have the process go through? I know, Bob, you shared last time about talking about having the town board take it. Surely, and please cut me off when I'm speaking out of turn, from the fact of having them go to the zoning board for variances as needed. Staff is seeing this document is almost like Town Law 278, that, which is basically a cluster plan that once this is here, and if it did go to the planning board would have the jurisdiction to deal with setbacks, to deal with building heights, to deal with, you know, the normal things, buffer areas and stuff like that, normal things that would get kicked to the zoning board.
Are we making the assumption that they are or are not going to be some of these parcels?
Again, the town board has said, what is the recommendation of this committee? We asked the town board time and again to make sure that we're proceeding forward. They've continued to, you know, put it back to us is we will consider whatever this committee and the 250 committee puts forth as what you'd like to see. I think we've talked here and we've talked with the 250 group that in order to kind of cut down some of the red tape of, you know, getting into it, that we'd like to see the property rezoned, or this committee would like to see the property rezoned all at once. That's why we need to look at what defined limits there are, and then it would be rezoned to mixed use, and then at that point, then it would come into whatever decided governing body, whether it be the town board or the planning board, for more of a normal application process to come in through like a sketch plan and then, you know, go into preliminary final, and you'd have the normal public hearings. At least that's kind of what staff has been kicking around so far.
If this document is intended to be user-friendly, then not rezoning it would be a major mistake from my perspective. I think it's almost unfair to expect a developer to invest the time and money necessary to come up with a plan that meets this guideline without some assurance that it's going to be reviewed by a process rather than by a legislative act of an elected board. Incentive zoning is an example. You can make an incentive zoning application to the town board. They don't have to hear it. If they feel that that application doesn't have merit, there's no decision rendered and there's no appeal. If you don't rezone it, there's nothing to say that the town board would have to take the matter up. And I think that's a huge risk.
That's kind of been staff's thought, but again, this is your document. This is your recommendation to the town board.
If the property is rezoned. And I agree that this document is similar in concept to 278 cluster development in the current code, then I think it should go directly to the planning board.
Anybody else? Thoughts, comments?
I can get my thoughts, but I think maybe everyone, do I need this, or are these things working over there?
If you can supplement, it's close enough, we can hand it out.
Sure. I don't know if everyone here is even aware of what's the difference between if it's going to go to planning or town board. I think, everyone's going to give you, not everyone, but I think some people here are going to give you blank stares going, they're going to look at it, they're going to say this, what's the difference between, going one direction or other? That might be something more that, other people would want to know in terms of where are the benefits of going one way or the other versus let's pick one.
We should talk about that. That's a very good point,
We'll
because
let Jim Costello share that since he's got 35 years in.
When we get to Four Corners,
Well, town board already has four corners.
that
Dairy.
does have a town board designation, so there'd probably be hierarchy to address as
It
well.
does because it doesn't have an overlay district.
well, the benefit, and I'm not pushing it for one way or the other, that's not my function here. It is your document, it's your recommendations, but just to help you through the process a little bit. If you were to have properties that were a confined zoning district where you know where the boundary lines are, you now know, even as a neighbor, I mean, if you're a neighbor that knows where that line is, and it's not going to encroach any further than where we've recommended that it should go as a group, you know where that boundary is going to end, and you know that we're going to try and build in buffers from that point back to their properties that are existing as single-family residential. If you don't have it, and every time a developer comes in close proximity to that bubble, he might come in and say, I want to encroach a little bit further into somebody else's property. And you don't know where that boundary line's ever really going to be until somebody's actually developed something on that boundary. So there are some pluses and minuses. The plus would be that you actually know what you've got to work with if the boundary's in place. The second thing, as you noted, if the property is already rezoned, the developer then can come in knowing that if he's got a plan that meets the criteria that you're establishing, then he can come in and get an approval through that process. If he has to wait a year or close to a year to get a rezoning, he's going to say to himself, I'm not necessarily going to stay interested in this project to the point where interest rates are rising or whatever the case may be. So there are pros and cons to both sides of it, I guess.
You want to talk about the difference between town board and planning board?
Yeah, and going back to your comment, there are some pros and cons as well. When you talk about incentive zoning, the pro there with the town board is the fact that the town board has the ability to modify setbacks, height restrictions, whatever the case may be, to ultimately benefit the community at large. That can't happen currently with the planning board under current site plan conditions. It could happen in this situation where if the authority is granted to the planning board to modify setbacks to accommodate the goals and objectives of the district, the mixed-use district, it would then make it a little bit easier because then you don't have to go to the zoning board of appeals if you need a variance here or there. It can be done internally as town law 278 allows. Now, town law 278 has limitations. That's where you can take, say you have a 50-acre parcel, you're allowed to build 90 houses on that 50-acre parcel because you've got to have infrastructure that's going to take up some space. So instead of getting 100, you probably get 90 or so. That's all you're allowed to have under town law 278. You can't expand the density in any way. You've got to live within those confines. This is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the possibility of allowing the planning board now to, look at a plan that meets the objectives of the mixed-use district, and it might have more density, it might not, but it gives them the ability now to approve that project without having to worry about variances for more construction, more height, whatever the case may be. So.
If this property, either one of these sites were rezoned, it doesn't preclude the possibility that a developer would still ask for a variance to incorporate another little piece of property or to ask for more height or ask for less parking.
But if the planning board has the ability to grant that relief instead of having to go to the zoning board, it does make it easier for the process.
But rezoning it doesn't preclude the possibility of applying incentive zoning to it either.
That's true. That's very true. But I think that, I think you've given leeway for a developer to be as flexible as possible with the design at this point in time. I'm not so certain that incentive zoning would be necessary in most cases, if any, but if they wanted to, yeah, you're right. That could apply to any zoning district in town.
I'm concerned that if it isn't rezoned, that the town board can seize these types of projects as an opportunity to impose incentive zoning.
Well, I personally, I don't think the town board likes having to deal with incentive zoning. I think that their mindset is if they could get away from it and have it be a rare occurrence, they would be more comfortable with that. I think they would be more comfortable with a zoning district allowing the uses that it would allow to get away from incentive zoning. Incentive zoning, it's a tough situation. For those of you that don't know what incentive zoning law is, it allows for a developer to come in and ask for more of something that he's entitled to by code, and the way that's compensated to the town is he either pays a fee per lot in and above what he's entitled to, and that fee should go to some type of capital improvement such as sidewalks or some other benefit to the community at large. That's always tough because when you're taking money from a developer, it looks like contract zoning basically, and that never looks good in front of anybody. They've been trying to get away from that. They've actually had developers do infrastructure improvements as part of incentive zoning, so they're not involved in accepting money from a developer. They want him to do some type of an improvement for the community's benefit as part of that incentive. I think that they would like to get away from that process. The other part of this too, a good reason why the planning board should do this instead of the town board, the town board's main function isn't site plan approval. The town board's main function is dealing with the town budget, personnel matters, the general operation of the community, not so much to have to waste every single town board meeting looking at site plan approval for projects that that come in before them. The other part of that is you have a very capable planning board in this town. They do a great job, and they are geared to site plan review and subdivision approval. That's their function here. And they donate all their time for that purpose. So to give the planning board more flexibility in approval of different designs, I think would be the more appropriate way to go, just from my perspective. But that doesn't mean, that's just one person's opinion.
Jim, let me ask you a question. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a problem with, being rezoned and going to the planning board. But so now, I'm the developer and I come to you and, well, there's some tweaks I want. I want to increase something somewhere or less parking. Are you still saying then that we would just simply potentially grant that, or we would look for incentives then from the developer if he wanted something more than was allowed, if you will?
I don't think, yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that we would just, if somebody comes in and they need 300 parking spaces, first of all, I don't want anybody to have to come in and ask for 300 parking spaces in a mixed-use district, but say, for instance, they ask for 50 parking spaces, and they need 50 by code, or they need 50 to accommodate the actual use. And they say, well, we can't do 50, we need 25, but if you give us that relief, we'll give you something in return. It doesn't really work that way. I mean, if you can't make it a viable operation, if you really truly need 50 spaces, and for instance, all these companies that come in, whether it's a restaurant or whether it's Walmart or whomever it is in Penfield coming into us, they know what they need. They know what it takes for them to be a successful business. Walmart really dictated on several occasions what they needed for parking, which surprised us because we didn't think that they needed as much as they thought they needed, but they do. So as a result, you're not going to have them coming in asking for a lot of relief from parking if they really truly need it, because they just won't go there if they can't get it. I don't think anybody wants to put anybody in a position where they're being set up for failure. I mean, that doesn't do any of us any good. If we have empty storefronts because nobody has enough parking to accommodate it, and nobody's more sensitive to that than I am, because I've been wrestling it with the Four Corners now for 30 years plus. So you do need adequate parking. You do need certain amenities to accommodate a successful business. And to cut somebody short like that under the premise that they're going to get some type of an incentive, it's just not appropriate to do that, I don't think.
I think the planning board, just extremely well qualified to deal with issues like the number of parking spaces
Absolutely.
and land banking parking spaces and building in provisions for other ways to park. But what about the situation where the developer requests a reduction in the minimum amount of the minimum square footage of commercial for his size project in order to increase the residential? We're being told, I think, that for these kinds of projects to be successful, there has to be a mix, and that the history has shown that there is some minimum percentage of different types of things that have to come together in order for it to be sustainable. I think there are developers in Rochester that would rather come in with more residential and less commercial, and we might even get to talk about a project like that later today. Is that a question of a variance? Is that a question that the planning board has the divine say over? Is that a question that has to go to the town board?
Yeah,
It's an excellent question, and I don't have the answer to it.
If I had my choice, nothing would go to the town board.
I would think that certainly it would not go to the town board. I think that it would have to go to the zoning board of appeal as either a use variance or an area variance, one of the two. More probably a use variance, because you're taking away the responsibility of the developer not to have to do commercial when he's required to do it. That's the use variance. That's difficult because you have to demonstrate that the property that you're dealing with can't yield you a reasonable return based on what it's zoned to be doing. So if you have to put in 25% of commercial area and you're only willing to put in 5 or 10, you have to demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's no way that you can make that property work without having to comply. So my initial reaction would be, yeah, that would be a zoning board issue right off the bat.
And I'll take it one step farther. If a developer comes in and is asking for all kinds of relief for different variances, that means the zoning is set up wrong. It's not, if they're coming in saying we need relief from this, that means it wasn't set up from the start as the right way, or else it's so different than what we want it to be. So there's that fine line where
it could be that.
Developers are only going to focus on one direction. That's all they want to know. That's all they want.
well, then it might not be what the zone's set up for.
It could be what you're saying. The other part of it could be the staff is not doing their job, because realistically, when people come to see us, we spend a lot of time with them to filter out who can and who can't meet the criteria.
We do get a lot of developers that come in all the time that want to do things with property that it's not zoned for.
I mean, people joke
They come
about
in
the
and
fact.
say, well, I want to do this here. Well, it's not zoned for that, so thanks for stopping, but, that's not, there's some other property over here that may be more in what you're looking to do, so. I mean,
We spend more time.
Yeah, I mean, staff, first it
before-
starts with staff, then we go through PRC and work with that group, and then it ultimately gets to the planning board or town board, kind of in a step 2 or 3, and that's kind of some of the stuff we're looking at already is incorporated into there, that you kind of get, and we do that today. We vet out a lot of the stuff that people come in and say, well, I want this, and I want this, I want this, but we go, well, you know, that's not applicable for that property that you're looking to do that, so here's something else you can look at, or, you know, we don't want to set them up for the failure or set up the board to have an application come before them that has no chance of being approved or is not in, you know, the realm of what we're looking at. Part 2 of that, is that we're hoping that this is a document that evolves over time. So we're going to put it out there, we're going to have a document that goes out there, and we go through the first development or it comes up, and here's issues that came up all the way through it. It was an issue. You know, we may need to reconvene another committee or bring stuff back, and, you know, hopefully this isn't a sedentary document, that hopefully, you know, it can evolve. If it's not working or it has issues with it, then we can continue to.
Failures of the document is already show up 10 years out or 15 years out with the empty storefronts and the subsidized housing on the second floor because they couldn't sell it at market rate.
Yeah, I do think part of it is, you're absolutely right. You know, for this to work, it does have to be, it's intended to be flexible enough for developers to be creative and present a plan that is market-driven. So the market shifts and changes. It's up to a developer to decide what is economically viable. I don't really think there's a developer should be asking for a lot of variations, because this is a very flexible document. And, you know, Andrus is right. If they're continuing to ask, instead of doing mixed use, I want to do multi-use, that's not the purpose of this. You know, there are a lot of places where that can occur. I think there's a couple of exceptions to that. One of the things you have to remember is that within a district, if you have one landowner who sells it and develops it all at one time, great. If not, you have a bunch of developers who are going to submit plans, and they have to be reviewed within the larger context of what's going on in the district. Then it's up to whoever's doing that review to know enough about the intent of mixed-use development to understand, you know, when you make compromises. You know, so if you want to do 4 stories here, you know, you can't just say I want 4 stories here and I'm not putting any trails or walks. The trail and the walk is an essential part of what makes this a walkable community. So I think we're trying to provide flexibility where we can, and then leave it up to the developer to determine how best to do that. And mixed-use developments change all the time. You know, where I live, it's gone through 3 or 4 iterations in the last 15 years. You know, developments do that. If you design it so you have a good spatial layout, you know, good layout of streets, good walkability, a lot of those things, what happens within the shell of a structure can shift and change. It could be a ice cream shop today, it could be a barbecue restaurant, you know, tomorrow, it could be a dry cleaner. It doesn't really matter what it is as long as it fits the basic idea of what we're trying to accomplish there.
And it's going to be incumbent upon whoever's here dealing with developers to give them enough background and go through that document with them so they understand all the components of mixed-use development, so that when they walk out of there, they can say, you know what, I can either do it or I can't do it, and they don't have to come back and just be browbeaten into the point where it's just not worth it for them
This
to
is
do
a new product in March.
it. It is. It's the newest.
It's just as new to staff as it is to the
It is.
Would you see a cover document to this that's user-friendly, that's something like, so you want to develop a project in a mixed-use district in Penfield with like 10 questions to ask or checklists that just helps them even pre-screen themselves so they can start to understand what, because not everybody's going to want to pick this up and read
Yeah,
it.
you're right. I think if you take the sections that we have with the components of what
That's kind of the
mixed-use really
executive
is,
summary
and do it
Yeah.
chocolate,
at the beginning.
just a 1 or 2
Yeah,
page thing.
and then just like even from the town's point of view, when we're communicating it through our website or whatever, it's almost like the marketing of this idea needs to be clear, like why it's a benefit, why the town of Penfield has these districts, what we hope to accomplish for the community and the developer, just a friendly layer on top before you get to section 6.3, item A.
But the other point of this too is it's not that the town is encouraging every developer in the world to walk in here tomorrow after we get it adopted and say, just build that thing right out tomorrow. I mean, there will be times, not so much maybe with Manitou because it's such a confined space, but certainly with the 250, the other one, I mean, that could take many, many years before the next person comes in to really want to do what's required for that district to be successful. I mean, it might not be as quick as everybody thinks it is. And if you don't have a lot of developers that are geared to this kind of development, it probably won't be. Manitou could be a little bit different because developers have an idea of what they can and can't do down there, maybe in 2 or 3 phases. It's not that expansive where you can't do something fairly quickly. But it might take a long time for a developer to finally get to a point where they say to themselves, I can do this, and this is how I want to do it, and I can comply with what the town wants as part of the process. I'm willing to bet a lot of them can't do that.
Short of a master plan for the 250 corridor, we're at risk that people are going to cherry pick certain things on small parcels, and you're not going to, in the short term, you don't have the mix that is outlined here.
Right.
That the parcels are too small to provide that mix. I mean, one 5,000 square foot commercial space and 6 apartments isn't going to come together.
That's right. But
I think that's where, one of the things we talked about is there's an encouragement to consolidate smaller lots, but partly because it gives you a lot more flexibility and ability to meet what we're asking for and what we're trying to accomplish. And the reality is, it is hard to do mixed use on a 1 acre development. I've seen some that have worked. So if a developer can come in with and have 1 acre or 2 acres or 5 acres and have a solution that accomplishes what we're trying to do with the document, then cool. If they can't do it, then, as we're talking about, then it means that doesn't work and it doesn't accomplish what we want to do. And it's not about, giving away things in order to have them be able to build it. If they can't build it and accomplish what we want, then there are other ways to do it. Consolidate with another piece of property, come up with another solution. So as Jim said, it's not a...
If you let everybody know what the ramifications are, that's one thing, because they haven't spent a lot of money in the process of doing it. We don't encourage them to spend money until they talk to us. If they can do what they think is profitable to them and meet our requirements, that's fine. If they can't, I'm saying to them, don't go any further. Don't waste your time and effort if you can't get there, because it's not worth it for you to do that. We'll find you another location in town that allows you to build an apartment complex if that's what you want, or whatever the case may be, townhouses. But if you're going to go through the process and get a good mix of use, and not every property has to have commercial use on it. I think it's got to have some components to it, but find another property that's more appropriate for you than that. It's not a horrible thing to say no to somebody if you tell them why you're saying no to them and you're polite about it.
Let's just circle back on the conversation we started with this group. We talked about town board versus planning board. Anybody have, obviously Bob's made his concerns noted. Anybody else have any thoughts, town board versus planning board? Because I think that's kind of, at least for staff, that's two different directions we kind of need to go as we start to lay out the process and, what would be an application process moving forward. So I think a recommendation from this committee on which method, ultimately the town board could decide.
Do you want to go around?
Well, I think the question is you've heard that, talk about planning board, who here really wants to endorse the town board having the authority? Is there anyone here that feels like that's the direction they really want to go? That's a simple way of doing it, because you haven't heard anything about it. If somebody's willing to say, yeah, jump up, yeah, that's what I want, go for it and let everybody else know.
And I think if that's the case with the planning board, you're obviously also making recommendations that they have flexibility as to how to deal with, other restrictions they normally don't with other districts.
And also the recommendation that the property be rezoned once we define a limit, everybody agrees what the boundaries are, that is rezoned at the end of this process rather than coming in and approving.
Same kinds of discretion that they would have under a 278 cluster development, that they can grant relief on dimensional issues.
Yes.
Just to jump back a second, because I don't think you clarified the fact that we do have to put that mapping together. We do have to bring that back to you for recommendations. We're not just going to throw a map out there to the town board.
No, I said we're going to be working on
We've
that.
got to bring
That'll
that
be-
back to this group.
Specific map,
Yeah.
And then this group would recommend that the properties on that map be rezoned.
Or
as
change
drawn.
it. They might not like the map
Yeah,
that we put
well, I
together.
mean, the map would have to be agreed upon, and then the next step would be if the group recommends rezoning, and then what board has the authority over it.
And I believe that the rezoning is a legislative act that has to be done by the town board.
Correct.
No one else has that authority.
Yep.
And in the future, if this were a great success and everybody loved it, the town board could once again rezone and make the area bigger.
Yeah, they could look at rezoning future areas within the town to mixed use or something else, so.
Right, with this as a guide.
Yep.
One thing zoning does, especially with Manitou, it's a little bit different, but with 250, where you have so many different landowners there, you know, doing zoning at one time provides a base level so that everyone knows what to expect. You have that discussion one time.
I agree.
Okay, I guess the question is, does everybody else agree with Bob? Speak now. Does somebody disagree?
That's the question.
Okay. So I guess the recommendation is for the planning board to be the lead on the project
From the Manitou.
from the Manitou group. That the planning board would be would have to go through concept plan and sketch plan and preliminary final as we do with normal applications, but the planning board would have the rights and abilities to, modify setbacks within the limits of, the parameters that we're setting aside here. And also the recommendation to the town board that this property be rezoned once we define that limit, and this group, agrees on what that map shows, that would be rezoned as part of this adoption. Do I hear ayes all around?
Before you finish, I just want to go back to your comment because it was well taken. Is there any thought about making a recommendation that incentive zoning is not utilized in the district?
I think
Frowned
it's-
upon by the group?
Or not encouraged.
Well, not encouraged isn't very
We
strong.
could make a recommendation to the town board that they abolish incentive zoning, and I could get behind that.
I don't think they'll abolish it, but I'm certain that you will see less and less of it as time goes on.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing no incentive zoning in this area. There's really any of the districts, but.
I think the whole idea of this is set up to provide flexibility. that
Right, we don't need it.
I think the whole idea of this
So
district
by
is not
definition,
zoning
it
itself.
It really
shouldn't be
is, yeah.
necessary.
You would think so. I
And
would
just
hope
like
that
in
we
a
did
common sense way.
discourage a really good idea, because this ordinance didn't have the provision to accomplish it, but incentive zoning would have.
Yeah. Well, the whole intent originally of incentive zoning was to add different amenities to the town through either funding back to the town or something else. Hopefully this document, we're requiring those amenities be installed as part of the development, and we're offering up additional density to them to get those amenities back, so.
Well, actually, that's a good point. The whole purpose of incentive zoning at one time was if a developer had to pay more than he was normally required to do, for instance, if he was going to run a sanitary sewer to others that he did not necessarily need to have himself, or he was going to provide sanitary sewering to others as part of his project that he didn't need, the cost of that sanitary sewering would then be put within more units within the project to offset that cost. That's what the original intent was. It's kind of gotten a little crazy now because developers the problem with Penfield mainly that Bob's referring to is the fact that a lot of the development in Penfield now is on 1 and 2 acre lots. Nobody wants to build on a 1 and 2 acre lot for a single family residence. So you've got developers coming in now asking for smaller lots, which is doubling density in essence in some cases. And in doing that, and that's why we want to get away from this, because we don't want to increase density anymore. If you were a developer that had to run a sanitary sewer to service everybody else's needs, maybe they were failing on their septic systems or the case, We would then give that person extra lots to accommodate or offset that cost. But nobody else should really benefit from incentive zoning after sanitary sewer's gone in, because there's no incentive for them other than to double their density to get more density to make more money. So the town board's trying to get away from that now so that it gets back to the density requirements it's supposed to be. I don't see density as being an issue with the way we've written this document. I think that there's flexibility in density. I think you have to accommodate for parking requirements, green space requirements. You know, we are limiting, you know, height requirements to 6 stories or whatever the case may be, but you can only put so much on a postage stamp, and you can't put more than that on. So I don't see the need really for an incentive zoning request, but the second I say that, you know somebody will crawl out of the woodwork and want one.
Sort of a companion issue, though, is whether or not the town's going to employ development impact fees. The first guy in doesn't need a traffic signal, but the second guy in does. Does the first guy escape paying his prorated share of the cost of the signal light? Or does he escrow that money or agree to pay his share when the warrants are justified for a light? Or in the case of 250, is the first guy in going to skate on the cost for upgrading the sanitary sewers, and it's the 752nd house which didn't have the capacity, that guy has to pay for the new sewer?
Those are some of the things we've been talking about internally with staff is, you know, either, I mean, we've done that with LUIMP, Land Use and Access Management Plan, down in 250-441.
Right.
Every development that comes in pays a fee towards the betterment charge that we've held money forever for Pembroke for there to be a traffic light.
Right. And it seems like
We have the money available when and if someday the
beginning.
state DOT agrees with us, there may be a traffic light on 250 across at the end of Pembroke. That's also paid for some of the rear access drives and some of the other stuff. So we did a study in that area, and that may be something, you know, we generate on 250 is either a sewer use district. You know, there's only a limited number of sewer units out there, that each property gets designated a certain number, and if you exceed that, then you pay a fee into a transportation district or, you know, what have you, that, you know, then that would help pay for future improvement costs.
That is a germane comment for 250. For Manitou, though, I think that whoever buys it, I think you're going to have one developer that's probably going to develop the whole thing. He may do it in phases, but I can't imagine you're going to have multiple developers.
Probability of that happening at Manitou,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. And you're right, for 250, when we get to that 250 group, we'll talk about
We're
that.
gonna have
But
to look at-
you're right, you might have to have an impact fee to associate with any future development that requires improvements that one person should not undertake.
You said
Does this ever get incorporated into this document? A discussion of
It
potential
typically,
impact fees?
well, if it does it kind of very briefly to mention that. The major discussion occurs during the review process with the town and how that's handled. And we talked earlier about some of the things that the town does. You know, for example, the line of credit. It's not clearly defined in the document. There might be a brief reference to it, but then that's discussed during the review process.
If this is going to truly be a user-friendly document, I think the potential developer has a right to have some order of magnitude of those costs going in, or at least a discussion of the issues going in, so that it's not blindsided by an impact fee at the end.
Well, and to clarify, the section, there's the one section that we kind of left alone, and Mark and I have talked about, it's something that the town needs to discuss how they want to do that. And I do think that process goes in this document. It's a little bit like I think Phyllis had mentioned earlier about kind of step-by-step of what you do and what are some of the issues that you need to address. So that needs to go in here, because you're right. I mean, the whole purpose of this is to let a developer know, you know, pretty as clearly as possible what is required of them, and then the level of flexibility they have to achieve that.
That's something staff's going to need to work on between now and the next rendition, is to pull some of that stuff together. Talking about, you know, sewer use fees or transportation improvement fees, or however we want to call it, but at least, you know, we've done that in other areas. If people aren't aware, we have, you know, we call LUIMP, but Land Use and Access Management Plan. was developed in the 25441 area, which we take, one, there's a fee for the study. The town fronted the cost for the study originally. And two, is a betterment fee that, each person based on their traffic impact to the area pays a certain fee that helps to, buy traffic lights in the future. So as Bob said, the first guy in doesn't trip the traffic in order to make that number work or something else. But obviously then they're not, out, and then the last guy in, unfortunately he gets hit with that. So we've set that up in other areas, and I think that's something we need to do similarly, and we've talked about it with staff, but we need to more formalize that and get that as part of this document.
And I think the town is ultimately going to have some responsibility for the maintenance of common open space, and potentially for the maintenance of common walkways.
If we take easements over them, you're right.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, and
We most
can
probably will.
you require a developer to assume the responsibility for pedestrian traffic from 500 acres of development when he's developing 6 acres? If the bike link runs across his property.
And we've developed special improvement districts for other areas, new developments that have come in, as they have ponds or street signs. If they want them fountains or stuff like that, we've created special improvement districts so that people living within that area are the ones that pay that fee. So it would be assessment through either tax or through something we
I'm just
set it up.
suggesting that's another topic that should be forewarned in
Yep.
this document. I'm kind of hoping that on either of these sites that the stormwater management plan is kind of macro for it, as opposed to every 3-acre parcel having some stormwater feature.
Yeah. And that you could have a special improvement district, and then every development could pay into that fund that would help maintain it, clean it, take care of it, but you live there, you benefit from it, you pay into a fee for it, and the greater Penfield's not paying for your stormwater treatment or something else.
But you're right, there are a lot of questions about the details of exactly how that's managed. For example, with where I live, the homeowners and businesses pay a certain fee, and then that fee goes to cover maintenance. But then there's an agreement between those groups and the city about certain maintenance that they cover versus what the homeowner groups cover.
So is in your project, the street is dedicated and not owned by the homeowner association?
Well, we actually had talked about that earlier. The streets where I live in Georgia, they're private streets because they close those streets off to hold events, and you cannot close off public streets, at least
Without a
they're-
special use permit before the town board. For the
Right,
4th of
so
July.
You can do that, that's right. It might be different in Georgia, but here you can do that. I suspect that's more of an internal thing for you, that a liability issue with the community, that they don't want to deal with that. But you're right, with a special permit, you could do those kinds of things here on a public street. You obviously have to make sure that safety is a major issue, but you could do it.
Water authority's not gonna like these projects all on private
Private
drives. And fire marshal's not gonna like.
Well, we may have to change our
Turning
design
radiuses.
criteria for the size of the roads. The road widths may be less than what they are now for this particular development.
Get right down where the rubber meets the road.
These are all things we need to talk about, and this is all stuff that's what's going to make it successful or not, and how it all comes together. And I say that's some of the details that staff needs to get into now and work on. This committee's kind of talked about the parameters of how that comes together, and permitted uses, non-permitted uses, and how that all does. But I think that's, in the next month or two, that's what, staff needs to work on is developing these districts and looking at how those betterment fees go, and talking about sewers and all that stuff, and how this kind of ties together and marries into this document.
It sounds like a lot of that's actually about this committee, in reality, in terms of what those pieces need, in terms of, if there's any issues that developers will be aware of, for us, we aren't gonna, sit here and say, yeah, this district does need more sanitary sewer, and this is something that needs to be addressed. Those are things that staff would know at the planning level.
And that's why I say we get down into some of the more minute detail that, or at a staff level, obviously we'll share with this committee of what that turns out to be, but that's what I was kind of going into tonight, is focusing on, do you like the changes that were made? Do we still agree that we like the document? Is it moving, in the direction that we'd like to see, kind of get a general sense from this group that we're almost there on that part of it, and then now now that we're that far along, that then staff, we need to sit down with the sewer department, we need to sit down with DPW, we need to sit down with all those people and start to hammer out those details, to get that incorporated as before we would consider it a 100% document.
You have to be comfortable with whatever it is you're submitting.
So, I mean, so those are all things that, we would share with this group. We're working on the mapping to show, put it up on a wall. Here's all the parcels that are within the bubble, that we've been studying, over that. Which ones are we going to include? Which ones aren't we going to include? Which ones do we see that, need to be in or out? Our plan is the group is to set up, for Manitou Inn for 250 is to have a meeting with all the people that would potentially be within that bubble. At least get the consensus, or at least get a weigh in from all the people in that area as whether they would like to be in or not. Explain it to them, make sure they're aware. Many of them have been following this process. I'm sure there's a couple that haven't. Make sure that they're fully educated on what this committee and this group's been talking about. And then share with them, here's the map, here's what we're looking to do. Would you consider, want your property to be considered at this time to be in that district or not? So people may say yes, some people may say no. And as Bob said, they would kind of cast where we would fall in the first rezoning, and then not saying that in the future that couldn't, expand out from there if it is successful and it's beneficial to the town and everybody likes it. The town board could always consider, expanding or adding parcels into that in the future or not.
So I have a couple of quick things, some developments with the site. Just to share with everyone, Dolomite, who owns a lot of the property at Manitou, is our parent company, Old Castle, has gone through their portfolio and they've kind of identified some sites that aren't part of our core business, Manitou being one of them. And in 2 weeks, they're holding an auction for this site. So over the past couple of weeks, we've had a lot of interest, meeting with developers, a lot of tours, and just so everyone's aware, I've been on these tours, and a lot of the comments back have been, kind of what I mentioned last week about limited commercial uses, especially if the same thing's happening with Route 250. There's a lot more drive-by in that area. It's competition and just limited use on that aspect. We've talked about the accessibility in and out, which would, preclude a lot of big development. And so you might be looking at, instead of incentive zoning or kind of more developable, it would be people looking for less to not fill a lot of those criteria of having 4 mixed uses in certain areas and percentage of spaces. So just sharing my feedback. I don't have an answer on what exactly is, who's going to succeed in the auction or what's going to happen. That was one of the concerns, was the commercial retail space. We discussed the open space, public liability, maintenance of it. If someone's going to come in and there's really not going to be a full-fledged town village with commercial offices, everything there, does it make sense from a financial standpoint from some of these developers to be able to take on that liability for allowing in outside people without having some sort of coverage from the town. And then also I was giving a tour, and a lot of concerns are with obviously the gun club, and it was 8 p.m. and tour, and that was a big turnoff for a lot of people. So just wanted to share those kind of insights, that is kind of where people are heading. I haven't really talked to anyone that is going to really do the kind of full-fledged plans that are up there with 5 stories with shops and live and work and bars and restaurants and all that stuff. So
Have you had any interest from outside the region?
a few, it's an outside company. It's on auction.com, so they've had some. I think right now there's 11 or so interested parties. They have to go through a certification process to be able to bid in a couple weeks. But it's promoted on this website nationally. I think part of this is to get a lot more visibility from outside, but not really specifically. I have not given a tour to a developer from outside the area.
Jim, has it been your experience that if you rezone to this type of a development plan, that it has any impact on assessed valuation?
Well, we've seen the valuation goes up, but I'll put an asterisk on that because as we all know, I mean, we were talking about, what was it, Zach, the mixed-use development in Rochester? College.
College Town.
College Town. One of the problems I know in all of our discussions is we don't have a lot of good examples within this region of mixed-use development. So in areas where mixed-use development has been proven and developers know what to do with it, land that's being developed, that's zone mixed use goes up in value because there's not very many of those. This is a little bit of a different situation just because, the first mixed-use development you do in Penfield would be the first mixed-use Penfield has ever done. So I'm not sure in this case it will help valuation unless you have a developer who's already done mixed use or has a pretty good idea of what they want to do with mixed use here. And the reality is if you can do, as you were talking about, somebody wants to do pretty much a low-scale residential development here, there's less money from a development standpoint than if they did, a higher density mixed-use development. It's just a question, do you have a developer interested in the site who knows what to do with it? You actually, just real quickly, you see there's a lot of them now where cities are actually taking land, and a lot of them's in the downtown core area or something, where they're taking sites either owned by the city or leased by the city or managed by the city or whatever, where they're advertising, doing requests for proposals or requests for qualifications for developers to do mixed use. So mixed use is very popular in a lot of parts of the country, and it really helps valuation. Here, I would think it probably doesn't help valuation based on the people you're already talking to.
If Manitou were rezoned, then a low-density, high-end, single-family residential development wouldn't be permitted.
Well, one of the things that we talked about a little bit and to revisit is, I know in your all's previous discussions, there's a concern about you don't want a developer who's going to simply do one residential development and call it good. And that's not the purpose of this. The other part of that is one of the purposes behind mixed use is a diverse types of housing. So rather than just one housing type, I think our original idea was if somebody came in with residential with 3 different residential types and a commercial or something along that line, that would equate to your 4 uses. And we were talking about that earlier, that's a discussion that we probably need to continue because there is a balance of wanting diversity on one hand, but not wanting to get away from the concept of mixed use on the other.
Well, Tom Galisano might buy it and build one house.
What would happen if that did happen? If someone bought it and wanted to, before this got enacted to mixed use and wanted to.
Today it can happen.
It could happen. We've been conscious of that since day one when we started this process.
And that's why we've been continue to move along with this process, because then now it's a private lake that has no public access. The trail connections we've been envisioning for years from going from Fairport all the way to the bay wouldn't happen, and we wouldn't have any.
Rochelle and I can attest that's exactly what happened in Glenita. You had public access when the restaurant was there. They sold the restaurant, tore it down, and built 5 homes, and there's no public access.
Well, if this property changes hands and they have a vision that's not consistent with this, does the town have the desire or the authority to superimpose a rezoning on it?
I think they'd be more inclined to have to look at the possibility of a moratorium on it than a rezoning, because they're not gonna rezone until we get the document to everybody's satisfaction.
Well, that's be interesting to know. I mean, maybe the buyers would like to know whether that.
Well,
What's gonna happen.
legally, if the property's zoned for single-family residential development at this point in time, and somebody walks in tomorrow and says, hey, I wanna build 6 houses down there, we're gonna be hard pressed to say no. It's zoned for that, they have the right to do that, there's nothing in place that prevents them from doing it. I wouldn't wanna take on that lawsuit because we probably wouldn't win it.
I would, and I've sent some examples, Jack, to Mark and Jim and Zach. And,
Right.
You know, so they can show you examples of some of the RFPs that are being put out. I mean, I would really, frankly, if somebody is gonna purchase this, I think you would want to them to purchase this with the idea of a mixed-use development. So if they don't know how to do that, there are a lot of developers around the country that do. So, you know, that certainly is something that you could pursue.
I haven't seen the list, but I'd be willing to bet that the people that have been expressing interest in it are not thinking mixed-use development.
Residential.
What types of people, you don't have to name names, but are you familiar with the types of companies that have expressed interest?
Yeah, all
in giving tours
sorts,
to?
people specialize in multifamily, single family, real estate, a lot of that type of stuff. So a good mix, but, generally it's been similar. Some are looking for a lot more density residential, some less. So it's a big mix, but it's limited on commercial. Some have talked about, possibility of office, or, some limited uses, but it's a mixture.
Okay.
I think part of the reason that we were looking mixed use is because residential is a burden in terms of tax revenue. I mean, the whole point is to take, if you're gonna allow something to get developed, you need something that's a little more cash positive to support the infrastructure that's going out there, right? I mean, I think that's how we started this whole entire discussion months and months ago.
And that's some of the thing we're looking at. I mean, we want to, Manitou Lake is one, preservation of what's there, have public access to it, but two, to have something that's tax positive that supports the base, and so some commercial office, other higher uses than single-family residential. So I think it's a mix of both of those, getting public access, preserving, the open space areas while, focusing the development on, the more open areas to the site, but also enhancing the tax base for the town as a whole.
High-end residential is tax base positive.
I mean, as long as there's a mix of uses, I mean, we can,
Yeah, any type of commercial use would have to be so destination-oriented to that site that it'd be very limited as to what you could do. I mean, maybe a kayak shop or something like that, but
I'd say maybe.
nobody's gonna, well, maybe Alex and
Commercial
Andy, everybody
that
goes to Alex and Andy, no matter where they are, but,
Bait shop for fishing or something.
yeah. But you're gonna be really hard pressed to get anybody to wanna do something commercial down there, because
No, I
the
mean,
visibility is
we're
really
going to
tough.
exclude a Wegmans, but Wegmans is never going down there anyway. I mean, it would be something that
I'm
focuses
not
on
even
the
thinking of
lake and the
Wegmans.
benefits of the lake. And
If you build a multi-million-dollar single-family residential, they're not gonna want a bait shop either.
No. No, probably not.
Yeah, it's just, with the timing, it's just,
So maybe in that particular case, various types of residential might be the appropriate way to go with it, if they're different types.
If you have, if it's mostly residential, you have a mix, diverse mix, you still have the preservation of the lake and the vegetation, you have public access.
Well, you also have diversity of the structures, and there's other requirements in there, so it's not a strip of apartment buildings all the same. I mean, there's going to be a lot of other requirements that would be in there that, I mean, we're not dictating what the uses are, but at least you have a diversity of a more villagey feel and different buildings and architecture and everything else. It's just not a apartment building, one after the other. I mean, so even if it does go more residential tact, I think you still end up with a better product of, having a path around the lake. You end up with, better architecture, better synergy, and how that all ties together than just having an apartment building with a parking lot slap down in the middle of it,
You
copied
might
and
get
pasted
uses of
continually
recreational
across
land towards the park,
across the
too.
area.
They could be compatible with some type of development down there. It's bidding for that area. We'll just have to wait and see. It'll be, is it in Old Castle's intent to actually sell to the highest bidder and just dispose of the land, or are they just looking to see what the market will bear at this point?
I think they're looking to see what the market's like, but I think they're,
If it's good enough,
I
they'll
think they're
do
gonna,
it.
I think it's looking like we can get some decent offers right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw the listing, there's a minimum bid, and as long as that's met, it's gone, right?
I think so. We're not, we're not as involved as we usually are with our properties.
Maybe we need a special town board meeting.
That's what it takes.
You want to bid?
Tonight.
They gave us that offer years ago.
Well, I think, is there anything in this document then that limits, 25% commercial in my mind doesn't seem like a whole lot in terms of, is that too much for a, developer coming in? That's what we've been focusing on for quite a bit of time now, and then turn around and say, residential might not be so bad. That's just a backward step a little bit. But I guess that, to me, defeats the purpose of the whole mixed use if you're just gonna turn around and say, 4 different residentials, we can figure it out. I don't know.
Well, I think we have in there 25% non-residential recommended.
Right.
Again, we're trying to keep flexible, but not, we have multi-use today. We have PD districts today. We're trying to make this something different. Go to Willow Pond, you got apartments in their area, you got single family in their area, you got office buildings in their area. We have that today, so we're just looking to do something different, and, I don't think it's the intent of staff or the town board for this stuff to have to develop today, tomorrow, next. It could be, and that's, I think the town board and hopefully this group is committed to having something new, something unique, a great development. And if it's not there, it's not there. And I don't think the town board has any concern or, about waiting to get what we want.
The strangest mixed use I've seen is in Denver, Colorado. They have live-work studios with mixed use with light industrial. Never ever thought that would work, but it does, and it works really well in large part because the design solution they came up with it's an elegant solution. It's very simple and straightforward, and it works. I think the way this is worded, I think it's accurate. I think we would prefer at least 25% non-residential. But if it's not 25% and it's recommended. So if it's not 25% residential, if that number is below that, then you're asking, well, are they coming up with an innovative solution that makes up for that? So it's a little bit like the whole discussion of incentive zoning, but within this zoning, it provides the flexibility to have that discussion. So it's not, we'll take anything, but if you go below that, then show us something cool. And if you see something that's very traditional and it doesn't work, then you say, no, it's not what we're looking for.
What else? Overall, are we happy with the direction we're headed in the document and at least the rough parameters? Obviously, we still have more work to do. I got a lot of notes here and stuff that staff's got to pull together, but this was just kind of the intent of this meeting was just kind of a check-see to make sure that we're not too far off into the weeds and we're kind of heading
Is it
in the direction.
possible in future drafts, there's not too many drafts left, I take it, but to show what changed? I know I read through this and you go, Jesus, we're to the point where the changes are so small, you miss them too easily. And, I don't know if there's a cheat sheet where you can just say.
I agree.
Because this one was the toughest one to read. The other ones before, it's been, there's been dramatic changes and we can all follow it. This one, it doesn't, things changed, but they weren't very large.
You can either look at a track changes option or at least just a little
Executive summary.
cheat sheet, as you
Even
said,
just
executive summary of
a grid that says, this was this, changed to this, this was this, changed to this. Just even something like that where you could just follow through and say, this was added, this was struck, this is,
Okay.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll just do a separate sheet on
Yeah.
there. What we tried to do is, we got 30 pages of comments from you guys, so trying to sift through those, and I think what we did is we said we addressed the comment, or if we didn't, we explained why we didn't, or something along that line. So we have the 30-page document where we tried to do that. And in there, it actually says there's a couple places where we didn't make changes. And that has more to do with the town's, process, what they need to do.
Well,
Those are things that I'd even still personally like to see, like, why, if there were, like I said, there were comments that you said you had comments come back and said, well, we felt we weren't going to address this. Well, which ones were those? Like those kind of things, just to see curiosity-wise why something was turned away or why we were looking at that.
I kind of came up with a draft that I provided to them. I can share that with this group or you or whoever wants. Some of the stuff we talked about at the group last time, do you want to eliminate this or leave it as it is? I tried to capture the consensus of the group, and everybody said, no, we think it's fine the way it is. So the comment back to the consultant was,
Okay, that's good. That makes sense.
leave it as it is. Not that they ignored us. They did exactly what we asked of them. We just said, the group talked about it. The group didn't think that chickens made sense in this district, so we said no chickens. So I'd be glad to share my comments. If everybody wants to see them, I'll send them out.
I think it's always useful just so that everyone has an idea of what's going on in terms
I'll
of summary.
forward them out to the group, and so I kind of made a next column over and just said, here's what we recommend back, here's kind of what was the consensus of the group. This section was discussed, no changes needed.
And then we went through and identified, all the comments. Did the comment require a change? And if not, we left it alone. If it required a change, then, and if it's a simple black and white change, we just put a note that we made that correction.
We actually color-coded back to...
Okay. And then in other
Green was
places,
changed, red was-
we wrote in what, if it was more of a question, but a change needed to be made, then a lot of times we would write in there what we wrote to be more specific than that. So I think we've kind of done that, but on the next version, as we make changes, we'll just give you a simple 1 or 2 or 3-page sheet that says these are all the changes that we made in here, other than periods and these versus days and things like that.
Does this document become standalone, or is it incorporated into the current zoning ordinance?
The ordinance piece of it would need to be incorporated into the zoning ordinance. That's section 4.
Has this been reviewed for incompatibility between other sections of the code? EPOD permits, sidewalk policy, tree planting policies.
That's all stuff we need to incorporate, because obviously right now we're going through a general code update. So one of the things that's going to change, and we just sent off a whole bunch of stuff to general code, all of our section numbers within our current code are changing within general code, so those need to be incorporated into this as well. So there's going to be numbering changes and everything else once this is adopted in, but that's something that staff needs to work on.
This document, though,
Just
this
to
ordinance
incorporate all
will
this.
supersede the existing ordinance or the design criteria, because I have a feeling we're going to be changing things like road design and some other issues. We're going to have to look at how this fits into everything, not just the ordinance, but also the design criteria and some other issues.
And those are sections of the general code that we haven't gotten every section, but we're talking about changing our parking standards as a town as a whole. I think we're way over parked for what we're required today.
But the way this is set up, the planning board has the discretion to deal with parking.
Yes.
Do they have the discretion to eliminate wetland EPODs or?
They'll never have that
No.
discretion. They'll never have that discretion. That's a state issue.
Well, then, steep slopes or woodlots.
Well, I'm not so certain we want to eliminate them. I think
you
you work,
just
remember this,
asking.
the EPODs are not prohibitive, they're regulatory. So, I mean, if you want to work within a steep slope, you have the ability to do that. You just have to demonstrate that what you're doing is not going to increase erosion or whatever the case may be, or instability. I mean, we're going to have to always look at those issues when it comes to engineering. You can't, somebody just made the mention of not taking down trees. It's a good point. I mean, you lose trees, you lose the stability of the slope. You're going to have to come up with something that demonstrates to the planning board or the town board or whoever's going to do this that you're not going to create a worse situation than what you have when you start. Hopefully it's going to be a better situation. But it's a good point that you bring up, is because we're going to have to integrate this section into our code. And it's probably going to have to be a little bit different than the rest of the sections of the code, because It's going to provide for more flexibility than the other sections of the code do. Four Corners does that. The town board has the ability to be flexible, and they do that, and it works out pretty well because you've got a really confined space to work within. So, I mean, it's not like we haven't done it before, but a lot of this will still apply. I mean, the EPODs will still apply. It's just how you use them, that's all.
Second thought. Street trees. There's a myriad of them.
Well, I know when we first started, we looked at all of the existing ordinances, and there were a number of places we very specifically looked to see if there were conflicts. And in some places, that information did not exist in existing ordinances. So I think if we go through it carefully, there's probably a few places where there, I won't say there are conflicts, but where what we have in here is different than what the existing ordinance is. But I think those are very, very few. I don't think there's very many of those. But what is missing in street trees, a landscape ordinance, for example, this doesn't have a landscape ordinance, so each district doesn't have, so unless you have each district specifically address landscaping across the board, or the town develops a new landscape ordinance, right now that's kind of a gap. That information's not addressed.
Well, it's not that it's not addressed, it's addressed in the regular town code, if there is any, that addresses that. You know, there must be a general, you know, in the town, there's certain criteria that someone would have to meet. Or are you saying you just wouldn't be any?
I'm not sure, does the town have a landscape ordinance at the moment?
We have a street tree policy, and we require landscaping with each development, but we don't have.
That would go to planning board basically to say.
Yeah, we don't have a landscape master plan or
It
whatever.
really applies to tract housing developments, subdivision housing developments. We look at individual commercial landscaping as it comes in before us, and I suspect that's what would happen as new projects come in. The board will look at it and determine what's appropriate for landscaping in certain areas, what isn't in others, depending on the situation. We have a consultant that looks at that and gives us recommendations, and generally we follow those recommendations, and it works out well. But the street tree policy may not be appropriate, depending on the situation. If you have a situation where road widths are smaller than they normally are, and you've got utilities running on either side of the road, you're certainly not going to plant a whole bunch of trees over sanitary and storm and gas lines. It's just not going to happen.
If the pedestrian way is not next to the edge of pavement, you may not want to have a duplicate cycle ride.
Right. We're going to feel our way for the first time. It's going to be an interesting process, whoever comes in the first time, but you got to jump in somewhere, and as we get through it, we'll embellish it and make it better with each application.
Anybody got anything else? Y'all happy?
Sure looks like that.
Well, yeah, that's good.
Come out of the chairs.
Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about the next steps as to timeframes and maybe a next meeting or something?
Yeah, I guess we kind of talked about it before. I mean, if this group generally thinks that, you know, we're heading in the right direction, obviously we still have a lot of, you know, staff items to go through, you know, how this fits into our code, how, you know, this all ties together, talking about, you know, potential impact fees or sewer use fees as part of that. We'll work on that stuff in the next, I'd say, month or two to pull that together, get that to Jim and his group, look at the zoning map, get that out to this group showing, you know, going from what is a bubble to what is a hard line document or boundary on that. And this group will need to weigh in on that. Hoping that probably by the end of August we can kind of have that stuff together, get it back to this group as, you know, closer to 100% document. Have this group kind of give it its blessing. You know, we talked earlier about, you know, the group would like to see this whole area rezoned. You know, as part of it, their group was supportive of having the planning board be the lead on this if it is rezoned, and giving the planning board the rights to modify setbacks and, you know, work with the document as basically Town Law 278, that they can, you know, make those changes within the parameters of this document, you know, without having to go to the zoning board. Just as kind of a recap. So if we get it to the town board, get it back to this group, you know, sometime the end of August, this group says, yeah, we like it, let's go for it. Hopefully the 250 group is in that same realm, saying, let's go for it. We would then, basically be directed to give this to the town board, saying, here's the document, here's the recommendation from the Manitou group and the 250 group to move ahead. Give the town board some time to look at the document, go through it. Hopefully, if they're, make whatever changes they want to make to it, or take it as is, put it out for public hearing. Normally, we got to do 30 to 45 days for a public hearing to make it available to the public. We've hopefully have made it available. It is online today. We'll continue to put drafts online as we move forward, so it is out and available to the public already. Once we give that time frame, then the town board would actually host a public hearing. We review the document, put it out there for the general public to make comments, feedback on it, and then the town board would take that input back, go through it at the same time. We would have to look at secret for it, whether we do a general environmental impact statement or how we handle that. We have to get into that part of it, and then hopefully ultimately up to the town board based on all that is whether they would want to adopt this as a new zoning ordinance, and then hopefully with that would decide to rezone these properties at the same time as adoption of this document. So that's kind of the... Yes. I don't know if we're going to meet those timelines and everything else, but I mean, I think we're looking at the end of the year is probably aggressive.
If the property sells and closes and has a new owner and they have a plan, is there at any point that this project, like what happens to this process?
Today it's zoned single-family residential.
Yeah, but
If
so
it gets zoned and somebody
if it
brings...
gets to be November and
But
we're
if-
in
That's
the
a good
public
point, though, but
hearing
if this
comment
committee still
period.
convene, it might be good to have that person come in and sit down, we could show, as we are tonight with the other site, we could have somebody come in and sit down and see if you've got a feel, if that's what you really thought it was gonna be. You're the ones that created the document, you should have, and this is realizing that it happens within the time frame that you're all together. I mean, I'm not gonna have you come back here next year or 2 years from now and say, hey gang, what do you think? Because we'll have public hearings on the issue anyways. But if somebody comes in and they buy the property and they've got some ideas, it wouldn't be a horrible thing to have you sit down and kind of go through that for 20 minutes at one of our next meetings. It'd be good for you to see it, I think.
We obviously got the 250, we got a developer that had an idea he brought to the town board for incentive zoning 2-3 years ago. That's actually on the back wall right now. That was his idea of incentive zoning, and we kind of hung it up. He's brought another version of it in tonight to share with the 250 group. You guys are welcome to hang out if you want to kind of see what his thought was. We saw it about 30 seconds ago, so I don't have a whole lot of reaction to it yet. But he was going to share that with the 250 group to kind of show where he's been sitting in the audience listening in and looking and revolving what he's proposing. So.
But if someone buys it and they have an idea and they take it to the town board or the planning board, by the end of the year and it doesn't reflect anything we've done here, they can do that. Do you just have a...
If they came in with a single-family residential project and it meets the code requirement, they could apply for a site plan approval to do that. We have nothing to stop them in that regard. I kind of think it's crazy to do that. I mean, if you can derive a better profit for multi-residential housing versus single-family, and you're willing to hold that property and collect rents for the next 50 years, I'd be more inclined to want to do that than I would be to just sell off to Ryan Homes or somebody. But legally, yes, they could. I'm hoping that that's not the case. I'm hoping somebody comes in with a nice project that everybody's comfortable with, and we go from there.
And that was kind of not the impetus for this, but that was the impetus to put, originally we got grant funding from GTC to do 250. We knew that the Manitou was wrapping up their operations over there, so that's why we kind of piggybacked and put Manitou Lake in this document, at the same time, because we knew that was turning over. So we, same as all the property on 250 is for sale. There's a lot of property out there that's up for sale today. We're trying to get ahead of it, come up with an ordinance to get a plan in place ahead of it. Not saying it's all going to redevelop right away, but we're just trying to get something, out ahead of it. So as these properties begin to sell or developments come along, we have a zoning ordinance that's set up and hopefully ready to handle that.
Jack, I apologize if you already answered this question, but of the 11 or so potential developers or potential purchasers of this property that you mentioned earlier, how many of those do you think were aware that this committee is looking at doing something unique with that property?
Everyone I met with, I shared that with,
Okay.
just so they're aware.
Was it taken as positive news or
Uh,
negative or
it's just
ambivalence? Or?
Mainly timing, just because we're having this auction, and it was only listed maybe a couple weeks ago, a month ago. They need to do their due diligence, and it's just too short of a time frame for anyone to do that. So it's kind of a really too short of a time frame for anyone to come up with a plan and be able to really give a good offer for this without just lowballing and just hoping for the best.
And I don't think anybody on staff has talked to anybody who might be interested. Usually they'll call every so often if they're gonna buy property.
We only know of one developer that's been following the process for, potential developer for a number of years. That's the only person that I've talked to. He just left.
Is a condition of approval of a project under this ordinance that it be tax base neutral?
No. No, I mean, no. I mean, you have to go by what the code allows you to do. And if the code allows you to build single-family homes, which are not tax-based neutral, obviously, unless they're $1 million homes, you can come in and build. I mean, that's why Ryan Homes has been here, because they've got a market here, and they're building it, but I'm not so certain that that's tax positive by any means.
Jim, are these projects
Right.
typically tax-based
Right.
neutral?
They're typically very tax-based positive as far as the money they generate versus the cost that goes into them.
Is that because they have so much of it privately owned? They don't impose the maintenance of streets and da-da-da-da-da on the
Well,
town?
it's a couple
Or
of things. One is density's a lot higher, so the more units you have, you're basically taxing each unit, and infrastructure cost is much less.
But
So
the impact on the school district with high density is negative
Well,
because
we
large numbers of kids.
We talked about it.
To a degree, I mean, the reality is any development of significant size has children attached to it. It's really more of a question of how much. Where I live, for example, we were talking about the age of people who live there. You have older people who live there. You have a lot of young professionals who live there. But as soon as they start having children, they move out because it's just not quite, it's not set up to be kind of family friendly. They don't have yards, there's a lot of steps.
Well, the planning board has some flexibility in creating a project that isn't kids friendly.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there's
if a
age
developer comes
restrictions
in,
and there's
yeah.
size of units and this lifestyle.
Well, and you're
Wegmans
right.
complex is tax positive. It has no kids living in Wegmans.
But if you develop some type of housing project that really lends itself to younger people coming out of college and want a place to live, they don't want to be with mom and dad, they're about 24, 25, and they want to be out on their own, and then all of a sudden, they get married, they're not going to want to stay there with children on the second or third floor of a building with no place to play. I mean, they're going to want to go out and find a Ryan home, because that's what Ryan's selling to right now, is
So I'm
that
just
bracket.
wondering if this document should say something to the effect that it's encouraged, that it's a consideration of approval is the impact on the tax base. And should playgrounds be discouraged? Should water parks? Should daycare centers conveniently located next to these high-density houses?
I don't think you're going to see a water park next to a high-end house.
It's interesting, where I live, they actually just opened up, a little gym for little kids. But it's interesting, in our development, there are no little kids. It's just a very walkable community. So people, we've talked about it, you have the core development, and then you have all these other developments that have started to pop up around it. And those are great places for young families. So families are moving in there and then walking into the village, for that type of use. And if it economically works, fine. If it doesn't, it'll go out. And before that, there was a gym, a 24/7, gym that was there. It didn't work, so, but the structure works well. The layout works well, the space. I don't know whether the little gym will work or not, but we'll see. But I do find it interesting where I live, there's no restrictions on who lives there. You have 5 kids and you want to live there, great. But you don't want to carry kids up and down 23 steps every time you go in or out. So it's been a natural thing. Those who've had kids have moved out and moved somewhere else. And it's usually in the country, someplace with a yard. And I don't want a yard. I've seen enough yards. I don't want a yard. So it worked out fine.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
My only thing is if somebody, to Bob's point, somebody comes in, purchases it, and wants to put one house, or 2 houses, or 3,
They can
this
do
is
it.
all for naught.
And it's a missed opportunity for income tax positive.
Today you can.
Yeah.
And I think we'll probably be meeting with whomever is the winner of the bid. And certainly when we meet with them, we're going to talk to them about all the things that we're doing as a group and what the town's vision for the area is and what we might want to see in terms of possible easements over the pond area, whatever the case may be. At least to let them know that up front, so as they're starting to design whatever it is they're coming up with, they can build that into the process.
I'm surprised more people haven't come in and asked
Nobody.
those type of questions.
Nobody
When it
has.
comes to, if they're gonna put in a bid, I would hope that they would come in at least have a conversation, download the document, take a look at what we're proposing.
So you could expect
From
that
this
in the
group.
next couple of weeks.
It may be busy in the next couple of weeks if people are
Let's
coming
do it in
in.
the
The
morning.
auctions
of.
went.
It's around 2 weeks from now.
I was going to ask, is it really that black and white? Because your comp plan identifies these areas.
It does,
as
but the comp plan
areas.
is always a guide.
Sure.
It's not a
Right.
law.
No, I realize that, but it's a little bit like 250 where you had a previous development and there was a development moratorium on that. So it's not quite as simple as somebody comes in because it's already zoned that way. They automatically get to do that. I mean, there's-
250 is zone 2 acre. The one developer wanted to come in for incentive zoning, the town board just said no, so there's not
So you're
there's
talking
not
about-
there's not a moratorium.
There's a change there.
If he
versus
wanted,
not a
if he
change.
came in tomorrow with a plan for 2 acre single-family residential homes, we would have to accept it, and he would move forward with 2 acre single-family residential homes. He just wanted more density, he wanted something else. We were just beginning this process, the town board said, we'd like to see this process play out, we'd like to see mixed use, go through, rather than accepted, incentive zoning. So it's not a moratorium. He asked the developer, I'm sure he'll tell you that it is, that we're not letting him move forward, but he could come in tomorrow with a 2 acre residential development plan if he wanted to. There's just not the market for it, so.
Yeah, people forget, everybody thinks the town can do this to you, do that to you. The town can't do that. The Supreme Court doesn't allow that to happen. There are judges out there that protect individual rights just as much as they do the community's rights. And you gotta be very careful because if you step on individual rights, you're gonna get shot down by a judge and you're gonna be able to do what you wanna do if it's zoned to do what you want it to do. So you gotta be very careful about that, and we always are. I mean, we don't get into a lot of lawsuits, and thank God we don't, because you don't win a lot of them, but.
I discourage my clients from taking that tact.
Yeah, it's a no-win situation, but I mean, you've got to be fair to people. I mean, if it's zoned for what they want to do and they're willing to comply with code, they have the right to do it. And that goes, sometimes that's not a good thing for a community either, because you have things like adult entertainment, and every community is responsible for providing some area for adult entertainment. Luckily, the place we provided is not easily accessible, and it's not very large, so you don't get a lot of that coming in here, but you got to deal with that stuff.
Let's build a pocket park.
Adult entertainment's on Ellison Park.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming tonight.
Yeah.
Appreciate your input as always. If you have more comments, feedback, obviously we'll always take it. As you read through the document or get further into it and have more feedback, please pass it along. Obviously, staff, we have more work to do, more things to look at.
So
We'll
we're gonna get
continue to
that,
refine this
the
deeper.
updates for them fairly soon, so
I
we
can-
can start looking at that, and then we're obviously gonna be updating it again after that, so.
Yep.
I will say, there are a lot of times when we do documents that we don't mark all the changes, like in this case, there were a lot of them. And so, one way to look at it is you have this document in front of you. Does this document do what you want? So it's kind of somewhat irrelevant of what the other one was. It's does this document do what you want? And if it doesn't, then there are changes that still need to be made.
To talk about.
What do you think of the document?
It's interesting trying to do a document that's really flexible on one hand and tight in other places. I think we feel comfortable with what we have in here. I do think the make or break of the document, so I think the document does what it's supposed to do. I think the make or break part will be, if you talk about the planning board's ability to review submittals that follow this, and if it follows it, then great. And if it doesn't follow it, then to make recommendations on how to adjust it to follow this.
The large developer is going to have more horsepower, professional horsepower than the staff at the town of Penfield has.
Well, that's why I support for us to meet with them up front. I mean, I've discouraged developers from doing things that they thought they wanted to do here because I knew they were going to go through absolute misery to get to where they had to be. Some have actually gotten through that misery and done what they wanted to, but it would have cost them twice as much as they thought it was going to in order to do it, and they haven't done it. So I think it's incumbent upon the staff to make sure that people understand what their rights and responsibilities are if they're going to go through this process with the new zoning.
And we've had a lot of discussions with staff. We spent a lot of time talking about what works and what doesn't work, looking at plans. And we were talking this morning or this afternoon about a plan in Florida where there's a very traditional development done that the American Planning Association in Florida Department of Transportation required it to be changed, and it was changed to a multi-use development that I think is very similar to the kind of thing that we want to see. So being able to see the difference between a plan that doesn't work and a plan that does, and understand what those details are. So we think that we're comfortable with the plan. It still needs details, like a lot of things that we talked about here. But I think it provides the flexibility and the rigor to do what the town wants if the staff and the planning board are able to follow that and to be consistent on doing it. And it goes back to your comment, Bob, about the zoning change. I don't see how you could take an area like 250 without changing the zoning for the entire district and make it work. Otherwise, you're going to have 20, 30 different plans submitted, all with a different focus and a different purpose.
Well, you gotta go through 20 or 30 rezonings to get to where you need to be, and I don't think anybody wants to go through that.
Yeah.
It just takes up everybody's time.
The key is to have the first development you do, don't sacrifice what you want. I mean, it's not just to have a developer do something. You want a developer to do what we've talked about. And if they do it and do it well, then those are usually very successful. And you have the first one that's a success, then there's going to be a lot of interest in another one.
So it's a tough situation for the planning board members that they spent a few number of hours, a month doing it, and here comes a cadre of attorneys and architects and traffic engineers and soil engineers and site engineers and surveyors, all explaining why what they're going to do is optimal. And
That's why they make all the big money. That's right. Town does control.
The town has a good staff.
The other thing too is this town's been very lucky. Over the years, we have it's 92% residential in this town, it's 8% commercial. And we have good occupancy in our commercial district. I mean, we're not begging like other towns are to have people come in here and develop just to keep our economy going. We can do that, and we do it without that. So we should be able to pick and choose the good projects and let people know if they don't have a good project, they're probably not the right person for this site. And we've been doing that for 30-plus years.
But we do have a lot of builders that want to come in and build.
And if they comply with all the requirements, that's where we go. And we've been lucky. We've had good builders in this community. We really have. Very rarely do we deal with people that are subpar.
I think
Very
the
lucky.
thing we're talking about, there's only 4 places in Penfield where you can choose development like this. That's zoned, if we follow through, that is zoned to do this. So in these 4 areas, you want a development that follows along the kind of vision that we've established. And there's a lot of other land around for developers who aren't able or are not willing to do that. So, I mean, like I said, the mixed use is really hot right now. And it's hot not just because it's a trend, it's hot because developers make money off of it. You know, cities and towns are getting tax revenue off of it, and people like living there. That's kind of a triple win. It's kind of surprising how many people want to move back to an urban setting. I grew up in an urban setting, and I'm very happy in Penfield, but I have a lot of friends who want to move back into the city and be close to all the amenities that the city has. And you got a lot of young people out there that can't afford to buy big homes, and they don't want to deal with lots. They don't want to mow grass or any of that stuff. So they're living in the city. And they're all looking. We get a lot of calls. Mark and I are getting calls all the time. Zach as well, for people who are waiting for this mixed-use district to be created so they can move into it. It's like, some of you won't be alive by the time it's built, but God bless you that you're interested in it. All right, everybody go home and have dinner.